So we came out of Wattle Point shelter in the morning, where the lovely young travelling family had topped up our depleted water supply. So we had dry camped overnight. We had enough water, it was fine. And we had a 14.5 kilometre walk to Kemp Bay shelter, which was the next shelter along, and we figured we'd decide when we got there whether or not we would have a really short day and stay or walk on. So we set out, and it was an absolutely brutal 14.5 kilometre walk across what I wouldn't even really call a trail. There was nothing defined. There were trail markers, although fairly kind of intermittently dispersed. But they weren't over any defined trail. It was literally sort of walking over the bluff with the sea to the left of us. Now, it wasn't a long sheer drop, but it was pretty steep and it was very rough going. So it was a bit hair-raising at times. It was really beautiful, and I kind of wanted to get the camera out, but I was actually scared that if I started focusing on taking footage that I would stumble. And it really was quite precarious. Like, it wasn't the most comfortable of walks. And then it came inland slightly for a bit across dunes, and then kind of doubled back to the Kemp Bay shelter. And as I was walking up to it, I really had just this sinking feeling like there just wasn't going to be water there. And at that point, we would have been in a bit of trouble. Not, life-threatening trouble. We're not in the middle of nowhere. We're not in a remote location. We would have been able to get out and get help, but it would have been a real bummer. And as I was approaching the shelter, I saw that there were a couple there with their car looking out at the water. And I just thought, I have actually got to get to this shelter before they leave in case there's no water, so we can get them to give us a lift or whatever we need to do to sort out how we're actually going to get a decent water supply. So I'm like carrying my heavy bag and running down to the shelter, and Mark, I don't think, realised what my kind of imperative was and was walking behind me looking a little bit bewildered. But I ran down to the shelter and opened up the tap, and sure enough, there was no water in the tank. And so I kind of called out to Mark, there's no water, and the couple were just getting back in their car, and then the woman looked at me. I was going to wave them down if they didn't stop, and she said, do you need water? And I said, yeah, we really do. We've actually just walked through, this is the second shelter we've walked through with no water, and it's going to be a real problem for us if we have to get to the next shelter with no water. And she was like, oh, no worries, we've got a 10-litre jerry can of water in our boot, which is just so random and fantastic. I mean, and it wasn't even like they were car boot camping. They were visiting friends in Stansbury and in their small car. So they weren't camping, and they just happened to have a 10-litre jerry can of water in their car. So they gave us 8 litres of water, which we gratefully received. Thank you, Karen and Andrew, so much for that water. You are lifesavers. And then we walked on from Wattle Point to Mozzie Flat shelter. So that made our 14.5 kilometre day actually turn into a 28 kilometre day. And the rest of the day was really tough going as well. More heavy going over sand dunes, lots and lots of soft sand up and down, and then quite a long sort of bushy stretch, sort of scrubby bush, and then paddocks, like private property paddocks on the right, really quite hot and dry. So very thankful that we had that water from Karen and Andrew. And we got to Mozzie Flat shelter late in the afternoon, and the tank was like 3/4 full. Huzzah. So we pitched the tent, and again, just not great conditions for hikers, really soft sand at the bush campsite, and there were a number of really nice kind of sheltered bush campsites, but they were full of car boot campers. The only place that was really appropriate for us to pitch our tent was right next to the shelter on the gravel itself, which was kind of uncomfortable and not a great place to pitch, and it was quite a tricky pitch as well in terms of the space. But we managed, and we got on with our evening, and it was quite pleasant. We had internet, which was very exciting, so I managed to post some stuff to Facebook and Instagram. And then we settled in for the night, met the lovely dog Halo of one of the car boot campers, didn't see the other guy except to walk past him a couple of times, and then we went to bed really early, as we always do. We're kind of in bed when the sun's setting at about 8:30. So I went to sleep straight away and then woke up, and I thought, oh my God, Mark's snoring really strangely. There's something wrong with him, and kind of sat up and then realised that it was another person snoring, and that at some point in the evening after we'd gone to bed, a guy had rocked up to the shelter and set up his bivvy just on the other side of the shelter, which was fine. Of course, you know, it's a shared campsite. It was just odd for him to come at that time of night, and yeah, very strange. Anyway,